He had already loaded her bags back on the train. His son grabbed her hand and wouldn't let go. The second bag was heavier than the first. That was the thing I kept thinking about, standing there on the Cutter's Bend platform with the morning stage already pulling dust down the far end of Main Street and the 9:15 not due for another hour. The second bag, heavier, like she'd packed more leaving than she had arriving. I set it down beside the bench and didn't look at her. That was deliberate. I had my reasons and I was standing by them. She said, "You don't have to wait." No, I said, "I don't." But I stayed. That's the part I've never fully explained to myself. My boy Caleb was back at the ranch with his uncle, already at chores by then, and there was nothing keeping me on that platform except the particular stubbornness of a man who wants to prove a point so badly he's willing to be uncomfortable doing it. The point was, I'd made up my mind. The point was, she was leaving on the 9:15 and that was the end of it. The point was, I had survived considerably worse than this, and I would survive this too. What I remember most clearly from that hour on the platform, more clearly than anything, even now, is the sound the wind made through the telegraph wires. A low hum with a little shake in it when a gust came through. She was sitting on the bench with her back straight and her hat in her lap, and she wasn't looking at me either. We were two people extremely committed to not looking at each other. Her name was Nora Bellecourt. She'd come to Cutter's Bend in late October answering a notice I'd put in the Fort Larned paper for a schoolteacher, because our last one had married a surveyor in August and departed with approximately as much warning as a summer flood. 22 children spread across 6 grades with nothing but McGuffey readers and a leaky wood stove in a building that used to be the feed assessor's office. I needed someone who could teach. I was on the school board, which in Cutter's Bend meant I was the school board, and so the problem was mine. She arrived on a Tuesday on the afternoon stage with 2 bags and a wooden crate of books, and a look on her face that suggested she had seen worse places and was reserving judgment on this one. She was 31 years old, she told me, and she had taught for 8 years in Missouri and before that in Tennessee. She was polite in a way that was completely without softness. She said what she meant directly and did not appear to find this unusual. I showed her the schoolhouse. She walked the length of it and looked at the ceiling and tested the window latch. "The stove draws wrong," she said. "It does." "Who fixed the flue last?" "The man who built it, probably 15 years ago." She nodded like that explained most of what she needed to know. "I'll need a second reader for the 4th grade level. The ones you have are too advanced." "I'll find one." "And the roof, that corner." She pointed to the northwest corner where the plaster had gone gray and soft. "Before the first real snow or you'll lose the ceiling." "I know about the roof." She looked at me then full on for just a second. Not challenging, just registering, like she was putting something in a file she was keeping about me. "All right," she said, "I'll take the position." That was October. By November, she had all 22 children not just quiet but working. There was something in the way she ran that room, patient but not soft, demanding but not unkind. She had a way of making a child feel that being ignorant was a temporary condition that she personally intended to fix, which is the exact right way to treat a child who has been made ashamed of not knowing things. My boy Caleb was 9 and had been struggling since his mother passed, and Nora had him reading full chapters inside of 6 weeks. I noticed that. I noticed most of what she did, which is not something I would have admitted to anyone at the time, including myself. She boarded with the Hapworth family on Cimarron Street, 3 blocks from the schoolhouse, and I saw her on school board business twice a month, and that was that. That was the arrangement. It was a professional arrangement, and it suited me. Except that by December, Caleb was asking me things I wasn't expecting. He asked me if Miss Bellecourt had family somewhere. He asked me if she liked horses, because he thought she might like to see the new filly. He asked me, with the particular sidelong approach of a child who knows he's asking something complicated, whether I thought she was lonely. "Why would you ask that?" I said. "She stays late," he said. "After school, sometimes when I walk past with Billy Hapworth, she's still in there with a candle, just reading on her own." I didn't say anything to that. "Billy's mother says she doesn't go to any of the socials," Caleb said. "Some people don't care for socials." "Do you think she's sad?" "I think she's a private person," I said. He chewed on that. "We're private too," he said, "but we're not sad." I looked at him, he looked back. 9 years old, and already knowing how to say a true thing in a way that made it harder to argue with. There was a night in December, the 9th or the 10th, when the temperature dropped so fast the water in the stock trough cracked, and I was out in the barn well past midnight checking the horses. I came back across the yard and saw a light in the kitchen window and thought nothing of it because I'd left a lamp burning. And then I came through the door and found Nora sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her. I stopped in the doorway. She said, "Your son let me in. He was worried about the roof on the schoolhouse, the corner." She paused. I was also worried about the roof. "Caleb let you in." He was very proper about it. He made tea and then went to bed. I stood there another moment. Then I came in and hung my coat and washed my hands and sat down across from her because there was nothing else to do that wasn't rude. She had her hands wrapped around the cup, which meant she'd been there long enough for the tea to go cold and hadn't noticed or hadn't minded. "The corner's been leaking since September," I said. "I've got a man coming first of the week." "I know, Caleb told me." She looked at the table, then back up. "I'm sorry to come by this late. This wasn't my plan." "What was your plan?" "To leave a note," she said. "At the gate, I'd written it." She reached into her coat pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table but didn't push it toward me. Then I thought it was foolish. Writing a note at 10 at night about a leaky roof. "It is a little foolish," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Caleb worries," she said, "about the school, about whether things are all right. He asks me sometimes if I think they are." "He's been through a lot," I said. "His mother," I stopped. "He pays attention to things, always has." "He pays attention to you," she said quietly. I looked at the lamp on the table. The wick needed trimming, but I hadn't gotten to it. "You don't have to stay," she said then. "I don't mean in the room. I mean you don't have to keep running everything yourself. The school board, the roof, the ranch, Caleb. You've been doing all of it alone for a long time." "4 years," I said. "I know. And I've managed." "You have," she said. "That's not what I'm saying." "What are you saying?" She picked up the cup and then set it down again. "I'm saying that Caleb thinks very highly of you," she said, "and that from what I've seen he has every reason to." The lamp between us made a small sound when the wick shifted. Outside, the temperature had dropped another few degrees and the wind was starting, a low, steady push at the windows. I said, "I appreciate you coming by," and that was the end of it. She stood, folded the note back into her pocket, and buttoned her coat. I walked her to the gate and watched her go up the road toward Cimarron Street with a lantern in her hand, and the cold coming down around her like something being closed. I stood at the gate longer than I should have. The problem with December becoming January is that things start happening that you didn't plan for and can't quite stop. She came to the ranch twice more, once because I'd promised Caleb he could show her the filly, which was now named Pearl for reasons I had nothing to do with, and once because the school board had actual business that couldn't wait. Both times she was exactly what she was, direct, sensible, warm with Caleb, appropriate with me. She never gave me any reason to think what I was starting to think. But Caleb was 9 years old, and children who have lost one parent sometimes become very careful watchmen over everything else they love. He started asking her questions at school that had nothing to do with school. I know because she told me, carefully, walking with me to my horse after the board meeting. "He asked me today whether I thought Cutter's Bend was a place a person could stay for a long time," she said. I wasn't sure how to answer him. "What did you say?" I said I didn't know yet, that I was still learning it. "That's an honest answer." He seemed unsatisfied with it. I took my horse's reins and turned them in my hands. "He wants certainty," I said. "After losing his mother, he wants—" I stopped. "He's been building something in his head about the future that probably has more to it than just a schoolteacher he likes." She was quiet for a moment. "Does that concern you?" I looked at her. She was looking back without flinching, which was what she always did, and I could not tell. And I'm a man who has read people a long time, cattlemen and bankers and hard cases at card tables. I could not tell what she wanted me to say. "Yes," I said, "it concerns me." She nodded. "All right," she said. That was January. I told myself it was handled. I did not mention it to Caleb, and he did not mention it to me, and February came, and I began to understand that the thing I was concerned about was not only Caleb's building in his head. In February, two things happened on the same week. The first was that the man who owned the Bellecourt land in Missouri, her family's land, the farm she'd grown up on, died without a will anyone could locate, and the matter of the deed had gone into some kind of dispute. And she got a letter about it from a lawyer in Jefferson City and came to me because I had some acquaintance with property law from a dispute of my own in the early days of the ranch. The second was that Hap Dunmore, who ran the grain operation on the south side of town, and was a widower with 3 children and considerably more money than I had, made a very public point of sitting beside Nora Bellecourt at the church social. She finally attended and refilling her punch cup twice and walking her out. I heard about the second thing from 3 separate people before I heard about it from anyone directly, which is how small towns work. She came to me about the lawyer letter on a Thursday. We sat in the school after the children had gone. She'd asked me to meet her there rather than at the ranch, and I understood why, and she spread the letter on the desk and I read it twice. The situation was what it was. There were 3 potential claimants, including a cousin in Kentucky, and the dispute would likely last at least a year and possibly longer, and in the meantime the property was effectively frozen. So there's nothing to go back for, she said, for now. For now, I agreed. Eventually the court will sort it out. You'd likely prevail. Eventually, she folded the letter along its original creases. That's a long word. It is. She looked at the window. Outside, 2 of Hapworth's boys were throwing a ball against the wall of the adjacent building with a steady thump, thump, thump. I'll write back to the lawyer, she said. There's nothing else to do. I should have said something then. There were several things available to me to say. I did not say any of them. Hap Dunmore asked her to dinner the following Friday. I know because Billy Hapworth told Caleb, who told me, with the particular delivery of a boy who is watching his father very closely. So I said, nothing, Caleb said, just telling you. Good to know, I said, and went back to the harness I was mending. I felt him watching me for another moment, and then heard him go back to his chores, and I sat there with the leather in my hands and did not look up for a long time. March. There's nothing quite like a Wyoming march to put a man's life in perspective. The world can look completely decided, cold and gray and finished, everything locked down under the last of the season's ice. And then overnight something shifts and there's mud under the ice and the light changes, and it's still cold, but it's a different kind of cold. A cold with intention, moving toward something. She came to the ranch in early March on a Saturday, which was unusual. She came alone, which was more unusual, and she came on foot, which told me she hadn't planned this either. I was splitting wood in the side yard, and I saw her come up the lane. She had her coat buttoned to the throat and her chin up against the wind, and she was walking the way she always walked, like the ground was there to be crossed. I set the axe down. I don't know how to do this, she said, which was the most uncharacteristic thing I had ever heard her say. All right. I'm going to say something, and I'd prefer if you didn't interrupt. All right. She stopped a few feet from me and looked at the woodpile for a moment and then looked at me. Hap Dunmore has asked me to dinner, and I've declined twice now, and he'll ask again, and I'll decline again, and at some point that will become its own kind of statement. But I wanted you to know, and I'm aware that this is presumptuous, because you haven't said anything to me. You haven't given me any reason to think this is anything other than one-sided. I wanted you to know that the reason I'm declining isn't the Missouri land dispute. It isn't that I don't like Cutter's Bend. It isn't any of those things. The wind moved something across the yard, a loose board or a shingle with a clatter. The reason, she said, is that I've spent 5 months watching you, how you run this ranch, how you are with Caleb, how you come to that school board meeting with the roof repaired and the supplies arranged and the problem already handled before I even know there's a problem, because you do not wait for someone else to handle things. The way you listened when I told you about the Missouri letter and just read it and told me the truth and didn't try to make it better than it was. She paused. The way Caleb looks at you. I didn't say anything. There was nothing in my throat to say. I don't know if any of this is. She stopped again. I have never said anything this direct to a man in my life. It is entirely possible I am about to be humiliated. You're not, I said. She looked at me. You're not going to be humiliated, I said. There was a moment that lasted some time. The wind came again, and she didn't move against it, just stood, and I crossed the yard and stood in front of her. I am not a man who speaks easily about things that matter. Margaret, my wife, used to say I expressed myself best through what I did and that she'd learned to read me that way, and I don't know if that's a compliment or a workaround. But I put my hand against the side of Nora Bellecourt's face, right there in the March wind with the mud and the ice underneath it, and she turned into it, and that was the whole of the conversation. So you'd think that would be the end of the story. Good part there, right? Man stands in his yard in March. Woman who has watched him for 5 months tells him why she's stayed. He crosses the yard. Except March became April, and April is a complicated month. It was the land in Missouri that did it, not the dispute. The dispute was still grinding through the courts. It was a letter from the cousin in Kentucky, a man named Amos Pratt, who apparently had more legal resourcefulness than Nora had given him credit for. His lawyer had found a way to challenge the entire claim, and her lawyer wrote back to say that her presence in Jefferson City for a hearing was effectively required if she intended to prevail. She told me on a Sunday. She had the letter in her hand, and she gave it to me, and I read it. When, I said, "The hearing is in 6 weeks. I'd need to leave in 5. She paused. It could take a month to resolve. It could take 3. I looked at the letter again. I had my reasons for what I felt, and I was not entirely proud of any of them. You should go, I said. I know. The land is yours. You should fight for it. I know. She looked at the letter in my hand. Say what you're thinking. I set the letter on the table. I'm thinking it's a long way to Jefferson City. I'm thinking these things drag out. I'm thinking. I stopped. Say it. I'm thinking Caleb is going to take this hard, and I'm going to have to find a way to explain it to him that doesn't make it sound like everyone leaves. She didn't move for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "Is that what you think, that I'm leaving?" I think you're going to Jefferson City, and things have a way of going the direction they go. And what direction do you think this is going? I looked at her, and I did not have an answer that wasn't mostly fear dressed up as reason. She picked up the letter from the table and folded it back into her pocket. I need to tell the school board, she said. There'll need to be a substitute. Her voice was even, which was how her voice got when she was deciding not to feel something in front of me. I'll write to you while I'm there. Nora. I'll write to you, she said again, and you can write back if you want to, and we'll see how things go. She looked at me then, and there was something in her face that was not quite hurt but was close to it. I'm not Margaret, she said. I know that's not what you said, but I'm telling you, I'm not leaving because I want to. I should have said more. I said, I know. She left a week later. I drove her to the stage myself, and I loaded her bags and the crate of books she was shipping back to Missouri with her. And I stood on the platform and shook her hand because I did not know what else to do in public on a platform in front of the stage driver and the Hapworth boy and whoever else was around. She shook mine back and stepped up into the coach, and that was that. Caleb didn't speak to me for most of the drive home. That was fair. The weeks without her were instructive in certain ways. I mean that without bitterness. There are things a man doesn't know about himself until something is gone and he has to stand next to the absence of it. I had managed 4 years without Margaret, and I told myself I understood grief and loss and moving forward, and I did. I understood all of those things about Margaret. What I had not considered was the particular shape of a different loss. A teaching substitute came up from Laramie, a young man named Elkins, who was perfectly competent and about whom I had no feelings whatsoever. The school board met once without anything urgent to discuss. The ranch ran the way it always ran. She wrote every week, a single page in her direct, clear hand, about the hearing and the cousin and the lawyer and what Jefferson City looked like in spring, and a boarding house where the landlady cooked too much and wasn't sorry about it. At the end of each letter, separated from the rest by a space, she wrote a line or two that was not about the hearing or the cousin. Those were the parts I read twice. I wrote back, I am not a natural letter writer. I found it difficult to write about the ranch without the ranch sounding like a list of problems. I wrote about Caleb more, which was easier, what he'd done in school, a joke he'd told at supper that I hadn't expected to find funny but had, a drawing he'd made that I couldn't quite identify but that he said was Pearl the filly. At the end of each letter, I wrote less than she did in her 2 lines. I'm aware of that. The 6th week she wrote that there was a possibility of a settlement, which was good news but also complicated. The 7th week she wrote that the settlement had collapsed and the hearing had been rescheduled. The 8th week she wrote that a professor in Jefferson City, a man named Whitmore who was connected to the law faculty, had shown considerable interest in helping with her case and had been very attentive. She did not say it as a complaint. She stated it in the same way she stated the other facts of the situation. I read that letter 4 times. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I wrote back that week, and I took more time with it than I had with any of the others. I wrote about the ranch, and I wrote about Caleb, and then I sat with the pen over the page for a long time. What I knew about myself, from Margaret and from the years after, was that I was not good at saying things until there was no choice. Margaret had loved me for decades, and she always said I was most honest under pressure, which she'd found exasperating and also occasionally endearing. I wrote, I don't have a way to say this that is anything other than plain, so I'll say it plain. The ranch is not the same without you in it, even once a week. Caleb is not the same. I'm not the same. I have no way to compete with a law professor, and I do not intend to try. What I can tell you is what is here. The filly is doing well. There's a room that needs fixing above the stable that gets good light in the morning, and I've been thinking about what it could be used for. Caleb asked me this morning whether you were coming back, and I said I didn't know, and he looked at me in a way that made me feel I'd failed some kind of test. I think he's right. I think not knowing is a failure, so I'm asking, are you coming back? I sent it and did not sleep well for 3 days. Her reply came on a Thursday. Half the page was about the settlement possibility resuming, which I registered. The last part said, I received your letter. I have read it several times. The answer to your question is yes, I'm coming back, and I think you already knew that, and I think the thing you actually needed to ask was something else. When I get back, you should ask it. The settlement was finally signed in the 2nd week of May. She wrote to say she'd be on the 9:15 into Cutter's Bend the following Tuesday. On Tuesday, I drove to the station. Caleb came with me, which he asked to do and which I did not argue about. We waited on the platform, the 2 of us, and the 9:15 came in 20 minutes late, and she stepped down from the car with 1 bag and a smaller crate of books, and she looked the same except for something in her eyes that might have been relief. Caleb crossed the platform at a run. She caught him and held on and looked at me over the top of his head. I looked back. We drove back to the ranch the long way because Caleb wanted to show her where the creek was running high from the snowmelt, and she sat in the back of the wagon with him, and he talked without stopping for most of an hour, and she listened to all of it. We had supper that evening, the 3 of us, at my kitchen table. After Caleb went to bed, she sat across from me the way she had in December, but the tea was hot this time and neither of us was pretending to be there for any other reason. You said to ask the thing I actually needed to ask, I said. I did. So I'm asking. She looked at me, not waiting, just steady. Will you stay, I said. Not for the school here, will you stay here? She put her hand on the table, palm up, and I put mine in it. That was her answer, not soft. Not performed, her hand in mine and her eyes steady and the lamp between us making its small sound. We married in August, on the 22nd. The ceremony was at the church, which she preferred, and afterward there was a gathering at the ranch that included more people than I'd planned for, but nobody seemed to mind the shortage of chairs. Caleb stood beside me during the ceremony in a suit that had required 2 visits to the tailor in Laramie. He was serious and still the whole way through, which was unlike him, and afterward he shook my hand. He actually shook my hand, 9 years old. I don't know where he got that from. In the photographs, the photographer came up from Laramie, which was Nora's one extravagance for the whole event. There is one I keep on the mantel. She is looking at the camera, but she has turned slightly toward me, and her hand is inside my arm, and I am looking at her. Caleb is beside me, serious, with the posture he used when he wanted to be taken for older. I do not look like a man who has gotten away with something. I know what that looks like. I've seen it. This is something else. This is what a man looks like when he has done things right and the world has finally not gifted him exactly but recognized it. That is not quite where I intended to end. There's the thing I told you I was thinking about at the start, standing on the platform in that last week of April with her 2 bags at my feet and the 9:15 an hour out. Because I didn't stay on that platform because I was being a good man. I stayed because I was terrified of getting it wrong. I had spent 4 years being competent at everything except the thing that mattered, and I had finally understood, in the way you understand something that's been obvious to everyone around you for much longer, that Nora Bellecourt was not a problem that could be managed at a distance. She was the thing I'd been managing around. The 9:15 came in. I went to the car door and I brought her bags out myself, both of them, and I set them on the platform. I picked up the heavier one and the lighter one, and I started for the freight wagon. And Caleb, who had come down from the ranch on his own horse with his uncle, because apparently he'd known more than I did about what was happening that morning. Caleb crossed the platform and took her hand. Not a hug, a hand, the way a person holds something they don't want to let go. She looked down at him, and then she looked at me across the top of his head, and I stopped with both bags in my hands. I set them down. "Your boy," I said, "has better sense than I do." She looked at me with something in her face that I had seen once before in the yard in March, and she said, "He learns from you." I left the bags where they were. There are things in a man's life that he turns over for a long time, trying to understand what they were really about. That moment is one of mine. Standing there on the Cutter's Bend platform with the wind coming down off the high country and my boy's hand in hers, and both bags still sitting beside the bench where I'd set them. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to. I knew that because she'd told me, and she did not say things she didn't mean. She was leaving because I had not given her a reason to stay that was worth the letters she was going to write, and the months she was going to be away, and the law professor in Jefferson City who was going to be attentive and interested. I could give her that reason. I had always been able to give her that reason. I had simply been waiting to be certain of the outcome before I put any weight on it, which is a very reasonable thing for a man who has buried a wife to do, and which is also, when you say it plainly, a form of cowardice. Caleb's hand in hers, my bags on the platform, the 9:15 an hour away. I crossed the platform. She was watching me come, and she did not look away. "Ask Elkins to cover the school one more week," I said. "I'll ride to Jefferson City with you. I'll see the hearing through, then we'll come home." She looked at me for a long moment. "All right," she said. "Yes." The bags stayed where I'd put them, beside the bench in the wind, and we went and sent a wire to Elkins, and then we went and had breakfast at the hotel because the 9:15 wasn't for another hour anyway, and there was no sense standing on a platform. Caleb ate 2 plates of eggs and told us both about Pearl the filly for the 3rd time that week, and she listened to every word of it, and I watched her listen, and I understood that this was what the rest of my life looked like, and that was not a small thing. Not a small thing at all,